Your expert speaker today is Dr. Amantha Imber. She's the organizational psychologist and founder of Inventium. I'd love for you to connect with her on LinkedIn as well. Well, without further ado, Amantha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. It is good to be here with you all talking about innovation. So, we are going to get really practical. I'm going to be sharing with you some really practical strategies that you can use to be more innovative, no matter what your role is day to day. So, but before I get into that, what I want to do is I want to actually share a story from my childhood. So, this here is a book called Annie Stories. And when I was 8 years old, I was asked to illustrate this book, which I think is pretty cool, right? Like as an 8-year-old. I don't know if there's anyone that's tuned in that was also asked to illustrate a book when they were 8 years old. I'm guessing not. So, how I got the gig is that my mum wrote the book. It's all about who you know. And my mum is a clinical psychologist. And what this book was all about is giving parents a method to help their children deal with phobias. And it was through the method of telling them stories. And so my brief as an 8-year-old was to illustrate those phobias from a child's point of view. So you're probably curious like about some of my work. So this this picture here is from the chapter of fear of nightmares. Or like I kind of look at this picture now and I'm like, what was going on with that bird? Birds don't have teeth. Anyway, it's chapter on fear of nightmares. This is from the chapter of fear of going to the doctor. And I now like I look at this image and I'm like, oh, I feel like that doctor's got a bit of a serial killer vibe going on. Anyway, and this is from the chapter of fear of dogs. Or as I've interpreted the brief, slightly more niche, fear of poodles comes up every now and then. Anyway, so the book ended up being published all around the world. And when I was 10 years old, my mum and I were asked to go on a book tour in America. You probably can't pick which decade this happened in. Yes, it was the 80s, correct. And no, my mum is not Cher. Just looks a bit like her. So the book did really well. But if you were to ask me now, like, how does one get a gig illustrating, a best-selling book? I would literally have no idea. Like I was in the right place at the right time. And I think that this is how a lot of companies approach innovation. They kind of get lucky. And where I first became aware of this is the a role that Inventium, my consultancy, played for about 12 years in judging the Australian Financial Review's most innovative companies list. And what I would notice, and this is probably in about year 2 or 3 of judging the list, is that we would get companies entering the list doing really well one year. And then we were open for entries the following year. We'd give them a call and go, hey, you're entering this year. And some companies would say, nah, we haven't really done anything innovative this year, as if, oh, yeah, sometimes we innovate, sometimes we don't, as if it was a choice. But what we found is that what is really important when it comes to innovation is that your organization and you, as a creative problem solver, has a sustainable and repeatable and predictable way of driving innovation. And how we do that at Inventium is we share tools that have been scientifically proven to drive innovation. No fluff at all. So, what I'd love to do, and this is a blank screen on purpose, is I would like to know, how do you define innovation where you work? This is not a trick question. I ask it because I find that most organizations that we work with at Inventium don't actually have a shared definition of what innovation is. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you about 60 seconds or so to type into the chat box. How do you define innovation at your organization? And if you don't have a formal definition, I would love you to just type in what you think innovation is. So I'm going to give you about 60 seconds to do that. And I'm very curious as to see what comes through the chat. So remember, it might be your formal definition of innovation, but probably, I suspect it's going to be more just how how you define innovation, because I do find most companies don't have a formal definition. Okay, so I can see we're starting to get some responses through. And what I find, and I've asked so many groups this question, I find that the most common response that I get is innovation is about doing something new, or it's about improving something, or it's about thinking outside the box, those sorts of things. But, at the end of the day, do we really need new stuff for new stuff's sake? So I want to share with you how Inventium defines innovation. And this is the definition that we used when we were judging the most innovative companies list as well. So we say that innovation is change that adds value. We adopted this definition for a few reasons. So, firstly, it's about change. It's like innovation doesn't have to be big and breakthrough and disruptive, as a lot of people define innovation as. It can be continuous improvement, it can be small changes, and that is absolutely innovation. But importantly, that change has to add value. So we do not want change or creativity for creativity's sake. It needs to add value. And that might be financial value, it might be brand value, it might be some other kind of value. And finally, this definition is only 4 words long, so it is easy to remember. So feel free to steal it in terms of how you might choose to define innovation formally at your organization. Okay, so let's get into how do we get better at it. And I'm going to take you through 5 different strategies that you can use as of today. To start with, I imagine that everyone on this webinar has probably had the experience of being struck by that lightning source of inspiration and thinking, oh my gosh, I've just had this great idea, I must do something with it. And often one of the biggest mistakes we see our clients at Inventium make with regards to innovation is they think that it starts with an idea, some spark of inspiration. But this is probably the worst place that innovation can start. So, why is this? I love this quote, sometimes attributed to Theodore Levitt, other times attributed to other people. But anyway, we'll go with Theodore. I would love to know, and type your answers into the chat box, what is this quote actually saying? So, I'll give you about 30 seconds. Tell me, what does this quote actually mean? What's it telling us? Type your responses into the chat box. I'll give you a moment to do so. Excellent. Love it. Love it. So that is exactly right. What we know is that people don't buy products, they buy solutions to their problems. So, what we need to ask ourselves is what problems do our customers, clients, consumers, whatever language you want to use, what do they have that currently don't have adequate solutions? This is the most powerful place for innovation to start. I remember many years ago, I was working on my second book, The Innovation Formula, and I was doing a bunch of interviews all over the world. And one of the people I interviewed was the VP of innovation at the Coca-Cola company over in America. And he said to me something that really stuck with me. He said, at Coca-Cola, we try not to fall in love with our ideas. Instead, we fall in love with the problems that we are trying to solve. Because the worst thing you can do is get super attached to your ideas because you don't then see the data if they are not actually working. So fall in love with the problems that you have to solve. So, how do we find problems? Well, I want you to think back on your own life over the last 24 hours. And I want you to think about a time, like something that frustrated you in the last 24 hours. Like, I know for me, bad internet connection was frustrating me a few hours ago, where I had to do a podcast interview and the line kept dropping out. And it was very, very frustrating. So I don't know what might have frustrated you guys in the last 24 hours. Feel free to share that in the chat box. I know that certainly where I live in Australia, public transport's always a big one. IT issues are a really big one. Sometimes children are sources of frustration. But yeah, tell me, like, what's something that frustrated you in the last 24 hours? And thank you for sharing. And what we know is that if I were to give you a solution to any of those frustrations that you have been experiencing, that is probably something that you would value, like it's something that you would pay money for. And this is really important when it comes to innovation because we ultimately need to be solving problems where we are delivering value for the customer. So we're going to put up our first poll. And my question for you is this: when did you last ask a customer, and we're using that term broadly, so it might be a client, a consumer, a customer, whatever language we want to use, when did you last ask them, what frustrates you about what we do as a company? So you've got some options here. You've got in the last month, in the last 6 months, in the last year, or maybe you can't remember. Okay. So going to give you about 60 seconds to select an option into the poll and we will see how we are looking. Are we deliberately going out and asking customers when they are frustrated? So a few more seconds to enter your results. Okie doksies. Can we please share the results of the poll? Okay, very interesting. I can tell you what I normally find with groups is that most people are not doing this. Most people are not deliberately going out and asking customers, what do we do as a company that frustrates you? And if I were to set you homework, this would be the homework. Go out and do this. This is where innovation opportunities lie. I'll take you through like an example that I love. So this is a company, I don't actually know if it still exists, but it's one of my favorite companies that I've come across in the States. So Field solves the problem or the frustration of when you are driving along and you look at your fuel tank and it's getting close to empty and you think to yourself, I have to now make time to go to a fuel station and fill up my car. Very, very frustrating. Even though it doesn't take that long, there never seems to be a convenient time to do that. So Field leaped on this frustration and they said, what if we could make it easy? So they created an idea, which I think of as Uber, but for fuel. And how it works is that you download the Field app. And when your car needs a bit of a top up of fuel, you open up the app and you book someone to come and put petrol into your car. So you leave the little fuel door thing open so your car can be accessed and then you pay for it via the app. Super, super cool. Solving a real customer frustration. Now, I don't know if we've got any Bentley drivers that have joined us today. Bentley drivers don't tend to come to my presentations anyway. If you happen to be driving the latest model Bentley actually partnered up with Field, whereby Field automatically registers where your fuel tank is at. And if it's a quarter or less, like close to empty, Field will automatically book a trip to your car and fill up your petrol. So you literally never have to think about that kind of thing again. So the first thing I want us all taking out of this presentation is to find frustrations, okay? Innovation does not start with an idea. It starts by identifying what are the problems or frustrations that our customers have, and this is where the gold lies. Okay, let's move on to the next tool. I want to talk about assumptions in the context of creative thinking. Once we've identified that problem that we're solving, what happens is that assumptions like spring up in our brain, and assumptions can be real or perceived, but essentially it's like having these fences pop up in our brain that say our thinking cannot venture beyond this particular area. So they really constrain our thinking. So what we want to do is we want to identify those assumptions and deliberately crush them. Because when we crush those assumptions by saying, well, what if the opposite was true to this? It's like we're breaking down that fence in our brain and giving permission for our ideas to wander in all these other areas. So let me give you a couple of examples. Firstly, we obviously have here an iPhone. I want you to think back to 2006 and imagine that you are working in the new product development team of Nokia and your boss says, come up with the next big thing in mobile phones. One of the assumptions that would be fencing in your thinking is, well, a mobile phone must have 12 buttons on it because how else am I going to make a call? Apple crashed this assumption and they said, well, what if a mobile phone just had one button on it? What could that look like? And through crashing that fundamental assumption, changed the interface of mobile phones as we know it. And of course, now the assumption is a mobile phone has 0 buttons on it. Now, I am a Volvo driver, which doesn't tend to surprise people. But anyway, one of my favorite examples of crushing assumptions comes from Volvo. So imagine that you're working for a car manufacturer and you are tasked with making a car more safe. One of the assumptions that would be going on in your mind is that, well, we typically design a car with airbags inside the car and we design a car to protect the driver and the passengers. Volvo crashed this assumption and they said, well, what if we could design a car for protected pedestrians? And what if airbags weren't limited to just being on the inside of a car? So a few years back, they launched the very first car that had airbags on the outside, where if you were driving this model Volvo and you hit a pedestrian head on, normally where the majority of damage is done is when they fall onto the front windscreen. But in this Volvo, the airbag pops up, thus minimizing a lot of the damage. So, examples of crushing assumptions, which I love. So, for you guys, whenever you are next sitting down to think creatively about a problem, what I want you to do is to spend some time thinking about what are the assumptions that I hold in relation to this problem. And assumptions can be real or they can be perceived. It doesn't matter. But the problem is they're fencing in your thinking. So, list them all out. And one by one, ask yourself, what if the opposite was true? What if a mobile phone had no buttons, for example, and use that as a springboard for new ideas. So that is crushing assumptions. All right, we are now going to talk about decision making because ultimately we'll have lots of ideas, but the impact of our innovation really does depend on how good we are at making decisions as to which ideas to progress and which to leave behind. So, can we please launch our next poll? Because I want to know, what time of day do you typically make your most important decisions? So, is it typically in the morning, is it typically in the afternoon or evening, or is it completely random? Like maybe there's no rhyme or reason. So, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to respond to this poll. I can see all those responses coming in. Okay, and we're going to close off that poll and we will launch the results, please. Okay, so we've got a bit of a mix. Again, what I find is most common here is that it's a little bit random in terms of when people are making their most important decisions at work. And the reason why it's random is because most of our decisions are made with other people. So this kind of depends, like what, like when can we get them? What time of day is that meeting with them? And this is not great. So I want to talk about decision fatigue. What decision fatigue is imagine that you like go to sleep, you have a good night's sleep at night, you wake up feeling refreshed. What is happening overnight is if you imagine your decision-making powers like a battery, you are essentially charging your battery overnight. And by the time you wake up in the morning, it's like your decision-making battery is fully charged. But with every decision you make over the course of a day, it eats away at that battery power, where by the end of the day, it's like that battery is running on empty. So the basic tenet behind decision fatigue is this. The more decisions you make over the course of a day, the worse those decisions are. So if we were to graph it, it kind of looks like this. And if you are someone that is perhaps guilty of making decisions at random times during the day, you are essentially leaving the quality of those decisions to chance. So, one of the biggest implications of decision fatigue is that it leads to us taking the easy way out. So one of the hero studies in this area of research, it was done looking at the decisions that a judge was making in a court of law. And they looked at over 1,000 decisions that the judge was making around whether or not to grant someone parole. And what they found is that if you were in front of the judge at 9 a.m. in the morning, you had a 70% chance of being granted parole. So very good odds. But if you were up in front of the judge in the afternoon, like at about 2 or 3 o'clock, those chances dropped to about 10%, right? Because decision fatigue had set in and the judge was taking the easy way out, which is to simply not grant parole. So really big implications because no one changed the world through taking the easy way out. A story that I heard many years ago was about Obama. I was about to call him President Obama, previous president, not the current one. And something that he was quite famous for is that he would eat the same thing for breakfast every day to remove unnecessary decision making. And he would also only wear one of two different types of suits. He owned dark grey and navy suits. And he said the reason why is because he didn't want to waste precious mental energy on deciding what to wear or what to eat in the morning every day. He wanted to preserve that energy for more important decisions. So for you guys, what I want you to take out of this is when you've got big decisions to make, especially about innovation, make them in the morning. Do not make them in the afternoon wherever you can avoid doing so. Okay, well, let's move on. Now, one of the big problems with innovation is that it is risky because it involves trying to predict the future. And how innovation works at most companies is that someone comes up with an idea, which as we know is not where innovation should start. Then someone puts together a business case with Excel charts that have a really steep gradient because the steeper the gradient, the more money you can ask for. And then we launch. And this is a very risky way to do innovation. So we need to do this instead. We need to replace that business case stage with actual experimentation with real customers. And how we do that is essentially doing what we learned in high school science class. We use scientific method. So this is how we apply this to innovation. So we call it the experiment loop. So firstly, we need to think about our idea and think about what are the riskiest hypotheses we have around why customers will find value in this idea. What are the biggest leaps of faith that we're making? We then want to design a minimum viable product or minimum viable version of the idea that will allow us to test and learn how behavior is changing if we put this in front of customers. We then want to analyze the results and iterate accordingly. So I will add, normally at Inventium, we spend about a day training people on how to experiment, but I'm going to take you through an example to help bring this to life. This was an idea that we had in response to a challenge that we were solving a few years ago at Inventium, where we wanted to help bring innovation schools into classes, specifically in year 9 and 10, so the middle of high school. And so we designed a program that was designed to be run over 6 classroom periods, so in class as part of the curriculum called Hack in a Box, where we taught people innovation skills. And what we identified as the riskiest hypothesis is, would teachers give up 6 periods of time to run Hack in a Box? Because that real estate is very tightly held. So to test this hypothesis, we spent $110 and we were able to get learnings within 48 hours. So we spent the money on mocking up a website using software that's no longer relevant, but it allowed us to mock up a website despite not being coders. We bought the URL, Hack in a Box, and that was $110 spent. Then what we did is we blasted this idea across our socials and we said, hey, we're looking for teachers that might want to bring innovation skills to the class. So we had about 60 teachers get in touch and say, this sounds really good. But that's just people's intentions. And we know that what people reckon they will do is not a great test of actual behavior. So we got on the phone to those teachers the very next day. We described the idea, but the crux of the experiment happened right at the end, where we said, "So we're taking bookings for Hack in a Box for next term. Do you want to book your class in?" Because ultimately, that's behavior. Like, that's what we're trying to measure. What we found is that 75% of teachers said, yes, book us in. So we could confidently say that hypothesis was supported. And then we had to say, we haven't built it yet. But we got that learning very quickly and very cheaply. So when you have an idea, instead of just making a bunch of guesses, what I want you to do is think about how can you run a quick and lean experiment instead. Okay, what we're going to do now, we're going to cover one more strategy. Now, I'm going to imagine that a lot of you are probably in hybrid kind of workplaces where you're a little bit in the office and a little bit from home. But what happens when we work from home is that often we can kind of find ourselves in back-to-back Zoom meetings or any kind of meetings, and we don't prioritize taking breaks. And at home, we miss those moments of subconscious processing where when we're in the office, like we might wander to the kitchen and have a chat with colleagues or wander to the bathroom or go take a coffee break outside. And they're really great moments of just letting things kind of mull around in the back of our head. But we get that less often at home. So, how can we recreate those moments? And the easiest thing that we can do is what I recommend based on research is that you take regular 5-minute walking breaks. We know that for creativity and energy to reset itself during the day, particularly in your longer days, all it takes is a few minutes. And if you can move while you're taking a break, like do a walk around the block, you get even more benefit. So the final thing that I want you to do is really prioritize, particularly when you're working from home, taking those short 5-minute breaks where you do something that involves movement. So to sum up what we have covered, we have looked at finding frustrations. This is where innovation starts. We have looked at crushing assumptions. So listing out what are the assumptions that we hold and asking what if the opposite might be true. We have looked at the power of making big decisions in the morning to combat decision fatigue. We have looked at running experiments rather than just putting together business cases, so testing real customer behavior. And we've looked at the importance of taking 5-minute walking breaks just to let our subconscious wander, mull over things because it is the best creative problem solving tool that we have in our brain, just letting our unconscious do the work. So, what now? I want to talk about a few resources that I'd love to get your way. Now, firstly, whenever I am speaking to groups of people, I always shamelessly self-promote my podcast, How I Work, that I've hosted for nearly the last 7 years now. And it's a show where I hand select some of the most successful people all around the world who are often doing really innovative things. And I unpack what are the habits, strategies, rituals that they use to get so much time out of their day. So I highly recommend check it out. Now, I have some digital things for you as well. You will need your mobile phone and open up your camera app because I will put up a QR code and get some digital resources your way. So 2 things I'd love to get your way. Firstly, the slide deck. One of our values at Inventium is share generously. So if there are tools that have resonated with you today, feel free to share them with your teams or other people that you know. The more people that know this stuff, the better. Secondly, I want to send you a resource that is I think one of the most impactful things we do with our clients, which is running a zombie campaign. So this resource will show you how you can do that yourself. Because one of the biggest barriers there is in the way to innovation is time. We hear that over and over again. So we need to free up time. And how we can do that is through identifying zombies that you might have in your workplace. Think of these as like the living dead of projects, of recurring meetings that don't actually achieve any value, of reports that get written but nobody actually reads. So there's instructions on how you can run a zombie campaign, kill some zombies. It is the best way I know to free up time for innovation. So I want to leave you with this quote, which I absolutely love. Innovation is seeing what everybody has seen and thinking what nobody has thought. I hope that the 5 strategies that I've gone through today go a long way in helping you think of things that no one has thought of before. Thank you so much. I will put up my email address here. I always respond back to audience questions very, very quickly. I love hearing from people that have been in groups that I've spoken to. But for now, I am going to hand back to Jenny.